Your Eminence, thank you so much for inviting us into your office here right next to St. Peter's Basilica. This is the place where saints are created. Can you tell us a little bit more about your Dicastery?
Qui è il luogo dove si conclude, si porta a chiusura un itinerario.
This is the place where we conclude a journey. It begins on a local level. At the beginning, we give a nulla osta, a go-ahead, if there are no obstacles. But the work of the investigation, of the study of the records, this work is done in the diocese. Also, I want to correct the sometimes mentioned notion of a factory of saints. Here in the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints, we receive the documents, we study them, we have them examined by a commission of historians. There is also a commission of theologians. At the end of this process, which begins with documentation in the diocese, our opinion is presented to the Pope.
Alla fine poi si presenta al Papa quello che è il nostro parere.
Maybe we can stay a little bit on this process, especially with the example of Blessed Carlo Acutis. What did the process look like there? You said it all starts out on a local level.
Beh, certo, direi che
Today, the example of Carlo Acutis is typical. There is a very old expression that says, vox populi, vox rei. In English, it translates to the voice of the people. Once it is unanimous, it is the voice of God. Today, we need to be careful with this assumption, especially with the influence of the media. And we experience dictatorships, where the voice of the people was in favor for years and years, but they were certainly not favored by the voice of God. We also have the magisterium, the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. Pope Francis often refers to the sharing of all the faithful who have matured in faith, in prayer, in listening to the word of the Lord, in fraternal communion. With Carlo Acutis, the voice of the people could be heard loudly, very early on. There were human factors such as sympathy for a teenager, for a boy who died in the prime of his life. But that is not enough for sainthood. In these cases, it is important to take a critical look, to study carefully, and to take a step back, cool down a little.
La distanza del temporale, no, per fare in qualche maniera raffreddare, è molto utile.
Carlo Acutis is called the patron saint of the internet. What does this say, also this canonization, about faith and new technologies, faith and the digital age?
Certo, se noi parliamo in termini molto generali.
Carlo Acutis fits into the digital age. He used the computer, the internet, and the tools that existed during his life. This period of time is not far away, but things have quickly changed. In Carlo Acutis' days, for example, the term artificial intelligence was a word that didn't mean much to people, but he was the kind of person who would have liked to use such tools. They have to be used intelligently. For some people, it seems that having a cell phone in their hands is almost as if they would have a prosthesis. One has to learn to disconnect and retreat for a moment of reflection and then open yourself again to engage in communication. And in using these tools, Carlo Acutis can be a good role model. Calling him a patron saint, that's not up to us. That's up to other realities. But it is a nice expression.
Questo non spetta a noi, spetta ad altre realtà, però è una frase simpatica.
Allow me a bit more technical question also, because nowadays it's much easier to follow a person online and what people did online. It's very clear for the canonization process, you look at everything that somebody said or wrote publicly. But what about the digital footprint? What about the website somebody visited, the movies somebody watched, the videos? Is that now also being taken into account?
Sì, diciamo che per la fase cosiddetta processuale anche l'epoca.
Yes, during the so-called trial phase, this material is much more contained, much more attention paid to it. On the other hand, we have many voices speaking into this topic. The Theologian Commission consists of 7 to 8 people discussing these cases among themselves. And even in the final stage, the discussion of the cardinals and the bishops, it is a meeting of 15 to 20 people. In Italy, we have a proverb that says, 4 eyes see better than 2. So in this case, we would say that the risk of missing something is a little smaller.
Questo diremmo il rischio è un pochino più attutito, meno forte, ecco.
I'm also sure it was no coincidence that Blessed Carlo will be canonized during the Jubilee of Teenagers.
No, non è un incidente.
No, it is not an accident. For a canonization, there has to be a miracle. And for a miracle, whether for a beatification or a canonization, we have to allow for some time for something to happen. And then its authenticity needs to be verified. It needs to be studied. If it really is an event that cannot be explained with the current state of knowledge, can it be attributed to an invocation that has been made? And this leads to the study of doctors, who need months. They need years for their work. So the coincidence with the Jubilee year is a providential one, not intended.
La coincidenza con l'anno giubilare è una coincidenza provvidenziale, ma non voluta.
What can teenagers learn from Carlo Acutis?
Ecco, ci sono delle cose da apprendere che valgono ovviamente.
There are things to be learned here that apply to the age, but then there are also universal values that apply to everyone. Not only the teenagers, but all of us can learn from Carlo Acutis. On a spiritual level, we need to learn how to detach oneself from realities, to dedicate oneself to others, to live for others. Of course, the commandment says, love your neighbor as yourself, and so it is important to know how to love yourself. So it is important to have a linear life, a correct life. The relationship with oneself is very important for the relationship with others. But Carlo Acutis knew how to live not only for oneself, not only to take care of oneself, but also to open oneself to the relationship, to the encounter with others, to give a witness, the witness of a Christian faith.
Alla relazione, all'incontro con l'altro per fare una testimonianza, la testimonianza della fede cristiana.
And if you allow me, a little more personal question. For you personally, for your faith life, what is inspiring to you when you think of Carlo Acutis?
Devo dirle che sì, c'è un fatto personale.
I must tell you that yes, there is a personal angle. There's the fact that the beatification of Carlo Acutis happened when the Holy Father had just decided and communicated to me to call me to this office. Given my old friendship with him, I had asked him to have time to think about it for a few days, a few weeks, and Carlo Acutis was beatified just the Sunday before. 2 days later, my nomination was made public. So the Bishop of Assisi invited me to go to Assisi to celebrate Mass on Sunday evening, and also to close the tomb that they had kept open during that week. And so I went willingly, and Carlo Acutis, I saw him at that moment as an icon, an image that the Pope later spread. It was the image of a young man, a young monk, carrying on his shoulders an old man, an elderly monk, and I somehow felt that Sunday a little bit like the elderly monk being carried by a young man. And in my prayer, in that first gesture, we would say, as the new prefect of this dicastery, I think it was to ask Carlo Acutis to carry me on his shoulders as a young man, even though I was old, and to help me walk with his strong legs.
Quello di chiedere a Carlo Acutis di portarmi come giovane sulle spalle, anche se ero vecchio, e di aiutarmi a camminare con le sue gambe forti.
Can you share a little bit more about Carlo's second miracle in Costa Rica?
Sì, il secondo miracolo è una ragazza della Costa Rica, se non sbaglio.
Yes, the second miracle happened to a girl from Costa Rica, if I'm not mistaken, whom I met, whom I saw twice, who came here to greet me, together with the postulator and so on. The miracle had happened because she had a very serious accident, and she asked for the intercession of Carlo Acutis so that she would not die. And this is what happened. It was what we call a miracle that is decisive for us. The exclusion of human intervention is important, at least as far as current medical knowledge is concerned. So there has to be something that the doctor says. We exclude human intervention for this healing. But even more important for us is this kind of closeness, coincidence between prayer and the gift of healing. And here I want to go back to that first question you asked. This is why why did this happen a few years between the beatification and the canonization? Sometimes it does not happen. Some are beatified, but canonization never happens because there is no miracle. Other times the period is longer. Why do we have this short period of only 4 years for Carlo Acutis between beatification and canonization? In this case, the knowledge that one can find in the people of God was very important. Obviously the mother or relatives of the sick girl knew Carlo Acutis because they were talking about him. She knew about him and she asked for his help. And if I don't know anything about a person, I don't call him. I call my mother. If I know that my mother is there and I ask her to help me. And that's how it happened. So the knowledge of an exemplary figure, even a saint, is important for a miracle to happen.
Così è accaduto, quindi la conoscenza di una figura esemplare, anche santa, eccetera, è importante per il miracolo.
In this Jubilee year, we will see another canonization of a saintly hero of the youth, Piergiorgio Frassati.
Ma inizialmente si era anche pensato di tenere insieme queste due figure.
Piergiorgio Frassati. At first it was also thought to keep these two figures together, but they are very different characters, very different. Carlo Acutis belongs to a category of adolescents. When Piergiorgio Frassati lived, at the beginning of the 1900s, in the context of a world war, conflicts, and so on, the category of youth did not exist. And Frassati is a young man who is around at least 24 years old. He was born in 1901 and died in 25, so he was 24 years old. This is an adult person who has made life choices, a person who is not at the beginning of his studies. He was about to graduate in mining engineering. He had so many relationships that even on the day of his death, he was surprised by the presence of so many people he had helped during his life. A great Italian writer, a great man of letters, a writer, a poet, Giovanni Papini said in one of his introductions to a biography of Frassati, Piergiorgio kept his good works hidden, as we so often keep our sins hidden. He hid the good works, the works of charity that he was doing. And all this came out of the blue, leaving his father and his mother astonished. His mother wondered, but why are these people coming? Why are they coming to our house after my son has died? And no one understood why. We have to understand that people had different lifestyles then. So Piergiorgio's mother was nervous when he came home late at night. She wondered what he had done and what he had been up to. But Piergiorgio would come from Eucharistic adoration, which was done in the parish until late at night. When we think of Frassati, we should not only talk about a commitment to the life of faith, to the spiritual life, or charity. With Frassati, we also talk about a political commitment. He was very close to the popular movements, for example. In Italy at the time, it was Sturzo's popular party. He was very close. There are also figures in socialism at the time, like Filippo Turati, etc., who talk about Frassati as this strong man. Today we would probably see a boy of 15 and a young adult of 24 as quite close. But at that time, they were very different.
Questo è un uomo forte, diremmo. È una figura, diremmo, oggi un ragazzo di 15 anni e uno di 24 sono molto vicini. All'epoca erano molto diversi.
But what can we learn from Piergiorgio Frassati?
Di Piergiorgio possiamo imparare una vita.
From Piergiorgio, we can learn a busy life open on many fronts, especially on the social front. He chose to study mining engineering in order to be close to the miners who were emigrating to Belgium at that time. He makes it clear that he had made this choice to be close to the most needy class of the time. However, in addition to this sense of charity, I think there are other aspects that we can take to heart. First of all, the strong sense of friendship, and then what was called in a book written 10 years ago, the age of sad passions, in which there is so much despair that even here we see very worrying indices of youth depression, and Piergiorgio provokes us to be joyous. That is a very important testimony. Joy, which is different from cheerfulness or happiness, at least in the Italian language, joy is more than just happiness, which is motivated by external reasons. It comes from inner reasons, from reasons of inner peace, of having found one's identity, of having made life choices, of feeling capable of serious relationships. And maybe today we need this kind of joy very much.
Serie E da questo viene la gioia e forse oggi ne abbiamo molto bisogno.
Pope Francis has canonized more than 900 saints, more than any other pope, granted. There were more than 800 martyrs from Otranto included in this number, but it seems important to him to also give those examples of the saints to the faithful.
Sì, diremmo, lei ha ragione nel dire il numero.
Yes, you are right when you say that the number has increased from these 800 martyrs of Otranto. But this is a joke, a joking phrase that the Pope himself said to have canonized, and at the first stroke, more than his predecessors. I would say that this pace also facilitates the practice, the praxis. We use the word process, which does not mean judgment. It is a process. The practice has been facilitated a little bit over the years, and especially with John Paul II. For example, where the request for miracles had been reduced, that is, where before 2 miracles were requested for beatification and 2 for canonization. Now 1 and 1 have been reduced. Also in the case of martyrdom, this is an age of martyrs. The martyrs, we would say, of the dictatorships of the beginning of the last century. I have been to Spain many times for beatifications of martyrs, also in Italy, Nazism, etc. Now for beatification, you don't need a miracle. It is needed for canonization instead. So this has made the paperwork a little more streamlined, but already John Paul II, with this very rationalization, had caused an increase in beatifications and canonizations. And this means that holiness is not something that is realized in heroes like those in Greek and Roman mythology, Prometheus, Ulysses, those great ones. Holiness is within the reach of everyone. It is a call addressed to everyone. And when the Church canonizes someone, it is because there is evidence to point to him as a model. St. Augustine used this phrase, "If he did it, I can do it." It's a phrase from St. Augustine, and it's kind of the reason, in simple terms, why the Church canonizes. Pope Francis has followed this practice, and there are also of current situations. Just a few days ago, as much as he was in the clinic, we had sent the Holy Father there the documents, because they are brought and so on. And just the other day, he sent me back the documents, signed by the Pope.
Mi ha restituito i documenti firmati dal Papa.
So even while he was sick and in the hospital, it was important to him to sign those documents.
Beh sì, noi gli abbiamo mandato i documenti con tutta la...
Well, yes, we sent him the documents and everything. It's like when I bring them to him. He signs them in front of me. This time, the Secretary of State, the deputy, brought them to him. But in this case, there are 2 examples, and one is from Latin America, a doctor, José Cisneros, who died at the beginning of the last century. He has already been beatified, but there is a devotion, a recognition of sanctity throughout the nation, throughout Venezuela. What we call the belief of sanctity is widespread throughout the nation and even beyond it. It also has persisted for many years, over a century. The Pope has decided at this point to exempt him from the second miracle, and so Cisneros will be canonized when the Pope can return. It is already planned for the coming months, not something imminent. There is also this Italian, Bartolo Longo, who was a man who founded a city of charity. These are aspects that I think today's society is very sensitive to. I would like to tell you something that a bishop of the early church already said. In the 2nd century, St. Ignatius of Antioch, on his way to Rome to be martyred, to be killed, he wrote several letters. And in the letter to the Christians of Ephesus, towards the end, he uses this phrase, "It is better to be a Christian without talking than to talk a lot and not to live as a Christian."
Piuttosto che chiacchierare molto e non vivere da cristiani.
Your Eminence, thank you so much for your time, for receiving us here.
Thank you for the interview. Thank you.